Pardon my mess. I'm still trying to figure out how I'm going to film segments like this in the future. This is just a temporary setup. Maybe. This might become more permanent, but as of right now, this is the second place that I've tried, so forgive me if it's not perfectly ideal, but it helps me get the point across. So, in my findings, the Leupold Mk5 HD 3.6 to 18 and the Nightforce ATACR 4 to 16 are actually closer together than they are far apart, at least as far as exterior standpoints are concerned. A lot of people brag about the Mk5 HD being so short. It's so short. It's only about an inch shorter than the Nightforce ATACR. Granted, if I was an inch longer, then, I'd be very, very thrilled with myself. But in the grand scheme of things, is an inch really that much of a difference? I beg to differ. Other people will say, oh, the weight is such a huge factor between the two. Well, let's find out exactly what they are on my scale. Now, granted, my scale is not super calibrated to anything, so this could be a little bit off from what you see or from what the actual manufacturers say that they are. But on my scale, the Mk5 HD is 25.5 ounces, fairly lightweight. The Nightforce ATACR is exactly 30 ounces, so 4.5 ounces. For many of you, that's going to be the deal breaker. Boom, full stop. You're going to go with the Mk5 because it is 4.5 ounces lighter, and completely understandable and justifiable. But let me make that live for other people that don't understand what 4.5 ounces feels like. This is a 124 grain hollow point 9mm. This weighs in at 0.46 of an ounce. So 10 of these makes up the difference between these two scopes. There you go. Hopefully, many of you can understand that and have a good solid grasp on that at home, so this way you can understand what the real difference is here. Can you feel it between the two of them? Absolutely. I'm not saying you can't, but I think it's a lot closer than a lot of people will claim it is. Another area where the Mk5 is close to the ATACR is in price, or at least currently it's still within price. If this was an illuminated Mk5 HD, it would be $2,500. Because it's not, it's around $2,000. So that is going to space it a little bit farther away from the ATACR in that regard. But the ATACR by itself is around $2,500. So if you are dead set on getting illumination, then these two are actually basically side by side as far as price goes. If you are fortunate and lucky, you could find these for less money. You could find them secondhand used. They both hold about the same value. I've seen some ATACRs go for around the $2,000 mark, and the non-illuminated versions of the Mk5, like that $1,600, $1,700 price point, again, depending on reticle. This is the Tremor 3, don't forget, so that does come with a pretty hefty premium. However, everything that we're talking about right now is extremely superficial. It's only from the exterior standpoint. And between the two externally, I prefer the ATACR. It feels much more substantial in hand, even though I don't particularly care about the rear ocular housing adjusting with the magnification ring. Many of you will prefer that. Me, personally, I could do without it. But I do appreciate it because it has a locking eyepiece as opposed to a fast eyepiece of the Mk5 HD. But that's neither here nor there. If you want to run scope caps, this creates a problem because now you have to have a Tenebrex cap adapter and then a Tenebrex cap, which allows it to easily rotate. So, bit of a hit and miss, pro and con sort of ideal. Again, something that you have to figure out what you're going to want. But the main question I want to answer today is, how do these two compare against one another side by side? Because if you're in this $2,000 to $2,500 price point, which one of these is the best overall scope to look through? Well, let me stop talking to you about it and let me show you. I want to be really close to the microphone on this to get as intimate as possible with all of you. If you want to find out more of these scopes independently, please check out their full reviews linked in the, hopefully in the top right area right now. If not, stay tuned and enjoy the rest of this video. On the left, we're going to have the Mk5 HD for the entire video. On the right, the ATACR. Right out the gate, you can see that there are some differences between these two. I want to start off with the reticles because that's the thing that you can interchange the most with these. On the left, we have the Tremor 3. On the right, we have the Mil R. The Tremor 3 is basically invisible to my eye until about 8-ish X. Even here at 10X, it's kind of hard to see all of the drops. You got a lot going on. It's a very, very busy reticle. But if you have experience with it and you're familiar with it, then it won't be that much of a bother for you. On the right, the Mill R reticle is a very simple milling reticle, but it's very efficient at keeping itself visible at any magnification range. Here again at 10x, you can easily see all of the little hash marks from the center working its way down and over to the left and to the right. I also really like that they included on that reticle a little section just off to the bottom right where you can use that for finite measurements. So this way you can figure out what distance you're shooting at using that section as opposed to the regular crosshair where it would just be too busy and too lost if it was part of the crosshair in and of itself. So Night Force gets points for that. There's a lot more to be said, but for right now, let's take both of these scopes up to their maximums. For the Mark V, that'll be 18x, and for the ATACR, that will be 16x. You would think 2x would have a significant impact down at distance as far as what you could really see. These 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper that I have down there, these little tiny donuts that I printed on there, are at 70 yards. Yes, you could see that on the Mark V, it is a little bit larger, but by how much? Now, I did film these on the same day. I did film this segment with the Mark V first, and it did get a little bit darker. That is why the image looks a little bit brighter with the leupold as opposed to the Night Force. But I will say that there's more contrast and there's more depth to the image with the Night Force. That is going to be a recurring occurrence here with this video. Also, take note with the Mark V at the top edge of the paper, there's some chromatic aberration, whereas with the ATACR, there's nothing. Again, that is something that you were going to be noticing throughout this entire video. Moving our attention now to a much farther distance target, we're focusing on a 400-yard brick building and slightly beyond. But for right now, keeping with these two minimums, what can we really tell between these two other than that there's a tree in my way that I can't seem to cut because it's just too far out of the way for all the shears that I can gain access to? Well, the field of view on these is as follows. The Mark V HD at its minimum is 28.3 feet, or so they say, and the ATACR is 26.9 feet, but it doesn't really look like there's that much of a difference. Yes, there is 0.4 of a difference X-wise, magnification-wise, but it really doesn't seem like there's that much of a difference. However, when we bring these both up to a magnification that they both have, which is 10x, you can clearly see that the field of view and the view looking through the ATACR is much larger. Not only that, the colors just seem a little bit better to my eye with the ATACR, and getting behind these things is going to be mentioned and talked about at nausea soon, but the ATACR definitely has the edge, even though there is less of the scope body to be found with the Mark V. This is really going to be a combination of two scopes that I think are very similar, but people will be definitely going one versus the other for the real minutia. And that's why I wanted to make this video, because you might be in the middle between these two going, which one do I really want to get? At their maximum here, again, 18x versus 16x, the field of view on the Mark V is claimed at 5.8 feet, whereas the ATACR is going to be 6.9. And I can believe it because you could see more downrange with the ATACR. Again, however, does it really seem like it's that much smaller of an image? Really look at these two. I really don't think the image looks that much larger with the Mark V as opposed to the ATACR. I think it has a lot more to do with tricks to the eye as far as the view looking through one versus the other, one being smaller with more magnification, one being larger with less magnification. Also, take note of the slight chromatic aberration on the Mark V. It's slight, but it's definitely there, and to the eye, you will notice it far more. In keeping with the exact same topic at hand, look at 900 yards on these power towers. At farther distances, you should notice a slight difference even more and more. And if you were to cover one versus the other, yeah, the Mark V looks a little bit larger, but not all that much. Chromatic aberration at those power lines right in front is definitely creeping up more with the Mark V as opposed to the ATACR, which has none, but some people might actually prefer that. As far as how forgiving the exit pupil is on both of these at their maximum, I have to give it to the ATACR. The Mark V just seems a little bit tighter, and the image doesn't seem as stable, meaning once we shift, it seems like it gets a little bit blurrier while we could still look through it, as opposed to the ATACR, which maintains a higher level of sharpness all the way up to the point where you literally can't look through the thing anymore. Bringing both of these down to a level playing field here at 10x, honestly, it's really hard to tell the difference between these two. Image sharpness and clarity, colors, brightness, the lot. They're both really good. And when we start going side to side, they both have a very good performance here. I might even give it to the Mark V. But right here, right now, in this situation, it's really splitting hairs. But if I had to go with one, I'd probably still go with the ATACR, because the ATACR manages to give you this layered effect when you shift side to side, where you could see where your parallax is perfectly set. The Mark V seems to have a much flatter image in that regard, where everything sort of moves all together. Whereas with the ATACR, it just seems like the closer targets are moving at a different pace from the middle targets versus the targets that we're actually focusing on with the side focus. It really is just a wonderful experience, because that's a great way of knowing if you have your side focus set properly. As far as how these are in a more dynamic sense, they're both really good at their minimums. I'm going to give it to the Mark V. It's just got this wonderful little thin profile of a body to it, and it really helps me draw my eye more to the center. Unfortunately, you can't see the freaking reticle, as opposed to with the Mil-R on the ATACR. At 10x again, both of these are smack dab right against one another. They're neck and neck. But at their maximums, I do have to give it to the ATACR. It just seems a little bit more forgiving, especially in real world environments. Here with a camera, it's really hard to get a good sense of it, but you're going to have to take my word on it. It is better with the ATACR. This is actually the best side-by-side that you can see for their minimums as far as the overall size and field of view goes. The ATACR definitely looks like it's zoomed in a little bit more, because it is, and the field of view on the Mark V is a little bit better, again, because it is, but only because of the magnification difference. If these two are both at the same magnification, it would go to the ATACR. Clear as day. Another thing that is clear as day is the chromatic aberration creeping up on the Mark V. With the ATACR, there's much less to almost none. I never really noticed it when I was running it. Whereas with the Mark V, it had this slight purple tinge to the entire image. You can't really see it on camera, unfortunately, but to the eye, you will see it. And I'm not the only one that saw that. Other people saw it as well. Other people that got behind this scope, and other people in my Patreon that I talk to quite regularly that have experience with the Mark V 3.6 to 18, they will vouch for that as well. It's just a little bit softer of an image. And if you're spending $2,000 on a scope, especially one versus the other, you want the most sharpness to the image. This is the most apparent here at 1,000 yards. Very clearly, again, these were filmed side by side the exact same day. On the left, the Mark V, on the right, the ATACR, and with 0 mils of added elevation, there's a clear winner already, and that is going to be the ATACR. Just look at the extra sharpness on the trees, on the shingles of the roof. Everything is slightly better with the ATACR, and that is the real quintessential turning point in this review as far as I'm concerned. The glass is always just one step ahead. This is with 10 added mils of elevation, and now the ATACR is pulling ahead even further, primarily because it gets better with added elevation, whereas the Mark V, I'm going to say it more or less maintains the slightly drops in the overall sharpness department. It's still a usable image, don't get me wrong. If you had to hold for a shot at that distance, it wouldn't be that bad, but it's still nowhere near as good as with the ATACR. However, with the Mark V, I can add an extra 10 mils of added elevation, whereas with the ATACR, I can only add an extra 4. However, bringing them both up on target again, centering the camera and adjusting the side focus as much as I can to get the most out of both images, guess what? The ATACR just pulls ahead even further. It's nice to have the extra adjustability with what the Mark V has to offer, but I'd much rather have to either hold with the reticle or use a 20, 15, even a 30 MOA mount to get the most out of the ATACR if I was taking it out to farther distances. There's a very clear winner here, all puns intended. I should have mentioned this earlier on in the video, but when I filmed both of these side by side, I used the exact same camera settings on both of them, so this way you can get a better representation of how much light both of these things let in. In this segment, I did film with the ATACR first, which is why the image looks a little bit brighter. If you're familiar with how light works, after the sun goes down, it usually gets really dark really quickly. So even a couple minutes difference, which is the difference here between the ATACR and the Mark V, the Mark V had a lot less light when I filmed with it. Nevertheless, though, the image is still clearer and sharper with the ATACR, but that could just be those extra lumens coming over the horizon. So it's kind of a bit of a moot point, but in my opinion, the ATACR still has a much better image, and the illumination is kind of okay. I should have mentioned this earlier on in the video, but this is a perfect place and time to do so. Typically, when you have a smaller view looking through a scope, typically that means your eye relief, how far away the scope is going to be from your eye to look through it, is going to be a little bit more forgiving. It's going to be a little bit farther away. Typically, when you have a very large view, or at least a larger view, in this case of the ATACR versus the Mark V, the ATACR is still kind of small on the grand scheme of things. There are a lot of other scopes, especially in the 4 to 16 range, that have a giant, and I mean giant view looking through it, but they also have much larger front objectives. This is only a 42mm. Typically, they have 50, or sometimes if you're a Steiner, you have 56, which is just monstrous, and it does change the overall view looking through it sometimes. But typically, if you have a small view looking through it, you're going to have longer eye relief, so this way you don't have to worry about scope bite as much, and you might get a better sense of your just surroundings because you see less of the scope. Whereas with, again, a larger view looking through the scope, typically you have a shorter eye relief. Both of these are right around the same. They both have an indicated 3.5 inches of eye relief, and where I had them mounted up was, as near as makes no difference, identical. Maybe you're talking about 1/8 of an inch here or there. That's really splitting hairs. That's the difference of you being from standing versus seated versus, prone. Your eye is going to shift more than that. Your eye is going to shift about 1/2 inch, give or take, depending on body structure and all that. But yeah, your eye is going to adjust how far it is from the scope at any given time, given position. But here, they're both basically the exact same. So there's no real benefit for the Mark V to have such a small view looking through it if it doesn't really increase the eye relief. But 3.5 inches is generous on both of these, so you shouldn't really have to worry that much about scope bite in any way, shape, or form. But where are my manners? Focusing at a 100-yard target, both of these went from their minimums to 10x to their maximums. Again, fairly consistent with what I've been trying to do for the entirety of the video. And both of these here at 100 yards have wonderful images. I'm not trying to insult the Mark V. I think the Mark V is actually an independent good scope, but I do prefer the 2 to 10 over the 3.6 to 18. I go over that in my independent review of the 3.6 to 18. In my review of the 2 to 10, I was wondering, is the 2 to 10 a better option or the 3.6 to 18? Because a lot of people run offset red dots, and if you're one of those people, why not go with an offset red dot, which is going to allow you to shoot inside 50 yards, let's say, or sometimes even a little bit further than that. Why not go with a slightly more magnification on the minimum, going from 2 to 3.6? Yeah, there's a big jump there, but still both are fairly consistent and usable because a lot of people run 3x prisms, So what's the difference between going from 3x to 3.6x? So why bother with a 2 to 10 if you're going to run offset red dot if you can get the advantage in the upper magnification range? Namely 10 to 18. That is a huge difference. It's a huge difference down low, but up top it's an even bigger difference. I still maintain I think the 2 to 10 is a more coherent, better scope. The TMR is still not ideal for a lot of things, but it definitely fits the role of the 2 to 10 a lot better than the Tremor 3 fits this 3.6 to 18. But again, I must maintain having the extra 18x up top is awesome. So if you are dedicated for the Mark V, 2 to 10 versus 3.6 to 18, 2 to 10, if you're not going to be running an offset red dot, you're going to be running it on like a running gun setup, something like how I would probably run it. But if you are going to be running an offset red dot and you want that little bit extra flexibility, then going from basically a 1x with a offset red dot to an 18x is huge. But the same could be said for the ATACR. 4 to 16 is not really that much different from 3.6 to 18. And the proof is in the pudding. Yes, there are going to be some anomalies going with one manufacturer versus one type of scope with one magnification range versus another. Yeah, one's going to have a larger view looking through it, one's going to have smaller, one's going to have better image, worse image. But at the end of the day, these two side by side, there really isn't that much difference between them image size-wise. Yes, there is a difference, but I don't think it's as big as a lot of people really think it is. And that's one of the things that I really wanted to show all of you here today, is that there isn't that much of a difference between a 3.6 to 18 versus a 4 to 16, especially when eyeboxes and overall view looking through the scope is larger with one versus the other. Now, if the Mark V had a much larger view looking through it, then it would just be even that much better. The field of view would be better, the view looking through it would be better, maybe even the image would be a little bit better, even though typically the larger the view looking through the scope, the lower the resolution, and thus the less sharp and clear the image is going to look. I'd much rather have more resolution than more magnification. To make non-scope people understand this concept, take a smaller image,
that you download online. Let's just throw out an arbitrary number, 800 by 800, right? The pixels square. And you try to blow it up to 1600 by 1600, the image is going to look like crap. Whereas if you took a 3200 by 3200 image and then scaled it down, the image is going to look really, really good because it's got more information to compress. Exact same principle applies with glass. The higher the resolution of the glass, the finer the glass, the better the image, the more information there is. And the more information there is in a confined space, the confined space being the viewer looking through it, the better the image is going to be. So if we took both of these, let's say, and increased the view looking through it by 50%, the image is going to look 50% worse. But because the resolution on the ATACR is a little bit higher, it will look better than the Mark V will look if you were to scale everything up. So image resolution is far more important than magnification. And I can't stress that enough. So many people are caught in the numbers game, in the race to, I need more magnification. I need a 1 to 10 because a 1 to 10 is better than a 2 to 10, or it's better than a 3 to 10. Probably not, because the glass has so much work to do that it's going to not have the same type of resolution and capacity as, like the examples I just made, a 2 to 10 or a 3 to 10 versus a 1 to 10. There's a big difference there. Perfect case in point, the 4 to 16 is only a 4x multiplier, the 3.6 to 18 is a 5x multiplier. And it doesn't sound like that much, but the difference is just enough that it really does have a big impact on the overall experience. I'm really getting ahead of myself. Perfect case in point, 200 yards. Both of these are filmed more or less within a few minutes of one another. The image is a little bit brighter with the ATACR, and I think that target downrange looks a little bit sharper and clearer to my eye. But more so than just the target, look at the image around the target. Look at the trees. Look at the rock, the dirt. There's more life to the image with the ATACR than with the Mark V, and that has everything to do with the resolution of the glass, the clarity and the precision of the glass used in the ATACR. So take that for what it's worth. Is the Mark V bad? Independently by itself, no. But when it's side by side with something that costs basically the exact same, it starts to show that it's got some weak links in it. However, those weak links might not mean that much to you if you're more impressed by how lightweight it is and the slightly extra shortness that it is. Maybe you like Leupold more as a company as opposed to Nightforce. That has a lot to do with it. Some people are absolutely going to go with one versus the other in that regard, simply because they're a brand fanboy, and there's nothing wrong with that. If something makes you happy, if something gives you joy, if maybe you get a better discount on one versus the other, if you can get a Mark V for $1,700 versus an ATACR for $2,500, that's a huge difference. I'm actually going to be touching on that in my final thoughts in just a moment, because if you can get one for much cheaper than the other, that is a huge driving force. Why wouldn't you want to save money and get a product that's like 90% as good? Unless you're that type of person where money's no object, in which case you're probably going to buy a ZCO anyway, but that's besides the point. The point is, every little thing matters, but it just depends on how much it matters to you, which is going to help influence your decision on which to get. Coming full circle to the resolution standpoint, I take a crop of both of these side by side, the exact same. You can see there's more information to be had with the ATACR, and that is the exact same concept that I was trying to relay with you. All I did was crop both of these to the exact same amount, and yes, the image is slightly larger with the Mark V, but it's much better with the ATACR. There's better colors, there's better contrast, there's more sharpness to it. It's a more usable image, especially the farther out you go, like we saw at 1,000 yards. So, with all of this being said, let's get into my final thoughts.
Of course, I'm in the same outfit in the exact same area. I've had both of these scopes for the better part of a month, and I've spent excessive amounts of time behind both of them. I'll start with the Mark V. From everything you've seen in the video, the Mark V has its pros, without a shadow or question of doubt, but one of them is definitely not the Tremor 3 in the lower magnification ranges. Just like with the TMR in the 2 to 10, it's just not perfectly optimized. But the same thing could be said with like the Nightforce NX8 2.5 to 20 featuring the Mill XT reticle. That below 4x is basically completely useless unless you just want to use it as like a spotting scope. but then what the hell's the point? The Tremor 3 is not going to be for everybody, but the good news is you can at least get this 3.6 to 18 with a plethora of different reticles, as opposed to the 2.10, which is only the TMR and the PR1. Yeah, so at least you have more options with that. However, unlike the 2 to 10, which is usable from 2 to 10x, this is really mostly usable between 3.6 to about 12. From 12 to 18, the image does start to fall apart, and I'm not the only one with this sort of experience. There are several Patreon supporters of mine that have this scope and say the exact same thing. Above 12x, the chromatic aberration does creep up a lot, and then the image just becomes quite soft. So just because this thing does go up to 18x doesn't necessarily mean that you want to go up to 18x. It's a bit of a letdown. The ATACR, on the other hand, is one of the better images I've ever looked through on a scope. Granted, again, this is only a 4 to 16, so it's only a 4x magnification range, whereas obviously the Mark V is a 5x. So that's going to put this in the lead. Now, as opposed to going from 4x as a minimum to 3.6, is there much of a difference? Honestly, no, especially considering that the mil-R reticle found in this Nightforce ATACR is very easy to pick up and use. And that's a big portion for me. I like the ability to use a scope from its minimum to its maximum all the time. And again, at 16x, this thing's maximum, the only thing that really changes is the exit pupil, which is going to get smaller on any magnified optic at its higher magnification. It's just the way it is. The smaller the exit pupil, the tighter the eyebox, so thus the harder it is to get behind it, especially if you're in an awkward position. But the good thing is, you could dial this down to any magnification underneath its maximum of 16 and be able to use it. The one negative about this scope is actually the illumination. It's only really usable when you are deep into the twilight hours. The sun's gone down over the horizon and it's getting dark. Then you could use the illumination. Now, if Nightforce offered this without illumination and made it, let's say, $500 less expensive, very similar to what Leupold does with the Mark V series, would I do it? I'd be on the fence with that one, to be brutally honest. The mil-R reticle is very easy to pick up at any magnification range, which is great. But where this thing goes is on a lot of hunting rifles. A buddy of mine has this on a SCAR Heavy, and he takes whitetail with it literally every single day. So for him, illumination is a must. And I guess it's kind of nice that it's already built in for the price. You don't have to worry about the a la carte stuff with this, because what happens if you bought it without illumination and you're like, crap, I really should have bought it with illumination. Now you're kind of boned, or you got to send it into Leupold, and hopefully they'll allow you to pay the premium to have the illumination installed. I'm getting off topic. The ATACR is a wonderful scope. Despite how much the scope body we see, the image is still rather large. But I would gladly give up how much of the scope body you see for the sharpness, colors, and contrast on this thing. The overall resolution of this image is truly breathtaking, and no chromatic aberration to speak of. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. And for me, if I was choosing between these two, this is the clear winner, without a shadow of question of doubt. I will take the 4.5 ounce penalty, and I will lift weights more. I will pull something out of my pack. I'll carry less ammunition. I'll do whatever it takes to take the ATACR over the Mk5HD, if I was spending that kind of money. If you don't want to spend this type of money, or you're really stretching, Mk5HD versus, where'd it go? Something else that weighs about 30 ounces and comes in the exact same magnification range and offers all the exact same features as the Mark V, with the exception of the 35mm tube. This is only a 30mm tube. The GG&G mount is around 6-ish ounces, and this comes in just under 38 ounces on my scale. So really close within the same weight of the ATACR, but it's going to be a lot longer. Now you're talking about 2 inches plus. It's going to be a little bit heavier, but it's going to be less than half the price. And it's going to come with good illumination and a reticle that you could use from 3 to 18. No, I am not sponsored by Meopta. No, Meopta probably doesn't even know I exist, even though I've sent them several emails to which I've never gotten a single reply from. I just really believe in the Meopta Optica 6 3 to 18 by 50, especially with the MRAD 1 reticle as seen here. It's just basically the perfect MPVO. And you're not giving up anything as far as the magnification, you're just giving up a little bit on the weight. That and the cool factor. If you have a Mark V on your gun versus an Optica 6, people are going to go, ooh, Mark V, ooh, SPR, ooh, good gun, no matter what. So, Hopefully this video wasn't too long for many of you. Which one would I choose? I've already answered that. Which one would you choose? That's the real question. I think it would ultimately come down to what you're comfortably spending on a product, and which one will sway you which one way or the other versus features, weight, and or just overall cool factor. For me though, there's only one winner, and that is absolutely going to be the ATACR. So with that, thank you all very much for watching, and as always, see you again next time.
And a huge thank you to my Patreon providers and my Subscribe Stars subscribers. Without you, this truly wouldn't be possible. If you'd like to support my channel but don't want to join either of those, I completely understand. But you can still help by using my affiliate links in the description below, and or like, share, and subscribe as always. Again, thank you very much.